How's it going, everyone? Dragon Age Veilguard has dropped. It's been out for a couple days, and it is still one of the most controversial games of the year. Now, generally, I've been seeing people say that they are enjoying the game. I've been seeing people say that they aren't enjoying the game, and I think there's a lot of valid criticism on the game, and there's also a lot of people enjoying the game, which is totally fine. What I want to talk a little bit is about the numbers. Yes, we have some charts to go over, primarily the Steam concurrent player data, which I feel like is a good barometer to use, because it's the barometer we get right off the rip. And you know what? People lie, men lie, women lie, but what doesn't lie is the numbers, Mason. The numbers don't lie. What do the numbers mean? And while numbers don't lie, the thing is, numbers can also be very easily manipulated to tell any kind of story that you want to tell. So I am here to try to give you guys some context to the numbers, because what is so very important, data is always great, but it is how we contextualize the data and how you explain the data that is very important. And I think if you were of the mindset that you desperately wanted Dragon Age Veilguard to do well, for whatever reason, you could look at something like the Steam concurrent player number and be like, oh man, this is a home run, and you could do everything in your power to convince yourself that it's a home run. And I will say that from my vantage point, and if you guys disagree, I am willing to have that conversation. But I'll add some context to these numbers as well. I would say that these numbers are a very big disappointment. Why is that? Well, let's talk about it. Right now, currently, the game has 64,664 players playing it. The all-time peak of the game had 24 hours ago. Generally speaking, whenever a video game comes out, either the peak is gonna come within 24 hours of its release, or by the time you get to Friday into the weekend, and that's where you're gonna hit the peak. So 77,465 players was the peak. Maybe it'll go a little bit higher, but 77,000 is around the number you're looking at. The statement I've seen a lot is that this is the most successful single-player EA game release in history. Sounds very good, right? That sounds very good. It's also currently the top seller on Steam. Oh, that sounds great. Well, first of all, let's break that down a little bit. It being the top seller on Steam, while it's good, it's the big game release of the week. It's of a historic IP, and there's not a lot of competition this week. I mean, Call of Duty Black Ops 6 came out, but that came out last week, and that's a game a lot of people are playing through Game Pass. I have two buddies that are playing this game right now, both on Game Pass. They didn't want to drop $70 on it. So, it being the top seller, I think that was to be expected, especially given the time that it came out. Okay, sure. It also beat out Shadows of the Damned Remastered. Huzzah! Like, good job, Dragon Age Veilguard. You beat Shadows of the Damned Remastered, although that game is $25, and I highly recommend you check that out. So, it being the top seller right now on Steam, I don't think it's that impressive. When I talked about, Sparking Zero being the top seller, it was Sparking Zero beating out, like, a lot of games coming out at that point, early in October. Dragon Age Veilguard is of a historic IP, and it was going to be the top seller given the games that are out. Okay, let's talk about some of the other stats. 77,000 concurrent players, it being the #1 EA single-player game of all time. Well, that's impressive and all, but EA had pulled its games from Steam back in 2011 and only brought their games back on Steam in 2019. Oh, and by the way, gaming on PC has greatly, and I mean greatly, evolved since fall of 2019 into now. So what is Dragon Age Veilguard's competition? Well, it beat out the Dead Space remake. Great. Dead Space remake is generally seen as a commercial, I would say, not success. They might go as far as to say a commercial failure, but take that how you will. It beat out Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which came out back in the fall of 2019, which I would say, again, is a different time period than where we're at now. Yes, it was only 5 years ago, but a lot of things have changed in 5 years, and PC gaming has exponentially grown. And it beat out Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which I would say would be an impressive stat if Star Wars Jedi Survivor wasn't arguably literally the worst PC port of all time. That PC version of Star Wars Jedi Survivor was absolutely horrendous. So using that game as a comparison point, I don't think is that valid. So, okay, it beat out the Dead Space remake. It beat out one of the worst PC ports of all time, if not the worst PC port of all time, which, by the way, also was $10 more expensive and required EA account linking, which has been proven to be something that deterred gamers from buying games. Dead Space, by the way, however, did not require EA account linking, so fair play to them. And it beat out Fallen Order, which came out 5 years ago. And again, I would say that PC gaming has exponentially changed over the course of the last 5 years. Dragon Age is a historic IP, but there's also the argument that, hey, Dragon Age is an IP, and BioWare IPs didn't resonate at that high of a level. I would say maybe that's the case if you look at the sales numbers. Like, Mass Effect total from a sales standpoint has like 20 million copies sold, which sounds like a lot, but given there's 4 Mass Effect games, the 20 million number isn't that insane. However, I think if you look at where gaming is at today, that's why I think it's a little bit misleading to compare it to games that came out 10, 15 years ago. What you have to do is compare it to its contemporaries, compare it to the games that are coming out now. And what's a good comparison point? Well, you want to look at Dragon Age as being a fairly niche franchise from the late 2000s, early 2010s. What about Dragon's Dogma 2? Dragon's Dogma 2 kind of fits that same exact criteria of it being a follow-up to a game that came out a decade ago, over a decade ago. And it's an action RPG that's of a fairly niche franchise. So where were Dragon's Dogma 2's concurrent player count? And by the way, Dragon's Dogma 2 was a $70 game as well. And that game peaked at 228,000 concurrent players. So that game peaked at 228,000 concurrent players, and that's it's kind of a same ilk of a game, action RPG. I feel like that's the type of game that you should be looking at, because with the growth of gaming in totality, a franchise like Dragon Age seeing its return after a decade, it should have a healthy level of hype. We should not be expecting, obviously it's not going to be as big as the previous games. Why shouldn't it be? It should be at a higher level, and it's not even at half of Dragon's Dogma 2. I think expecting half of Dragon's Dogma 2 would be at the baseline, the minimum of what Dragon Age Veilguard could pull. There are other games that I think are interesting to compare it to. Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut peaked at 77,000 as well, so Dragon Age literally is on par with Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut, which is a game that came out on PC 4 years after its initial release. So it's matching Ghost of Tsushima. I guess credit to Sony for, making bank on that game, but guess what game it's not even beating? Metaphor ReFantazio peaked at 85,961 players. Y'all want to talk about Dragon Age being a niche franchise? JRPGs and PC has never been the premier place to play JRPG. Metaphor is not a massive IP. It's not a massively well-known game. Yeah, it was received incredibly well, but that game peaked at 86,000 concurrent players. Dragon Age Veilguard peaked at 77,000. Metaphor is ahead of it, and Metaphor and RPG as well, totally of a different kind, but you get the idea. I see a lot of people comparing it to Black Myth Wukong. I just feel like that comparison point isn't that fair because this game was enormous in China. However, I was studying the Wukong concurrent player counts for a while, and there would be a fall-off period where the game would go from its 2 million concurrent players into the hundreds of thousands, and that's because the time conversion in China would be at the time when everybody was sleeping, and it would still have around 200,000 to 300,000 players. I'm very confident in thinking that Wukong is doing exponentially better than Dragon Age on Steam, even if you just look at sales outside of China. I might be wrong about that, but that's my interpretation. But that's why I didn't even like using Wukong as a data point. It would be an interesting comparison, but I just think, the game sold so many copies in China that it's not really fair. However, I think anybody looking at these numbers with Dragon Age Veilguard and seeing it as a success, a gigantic success at that, is being very disingenuous. I don't think this number is a success. Is it fine? I don't even know if I would say that. Like, Dragon Age and BioWare, while they never released super popular games and mainstream titles, I would still say they released games that were very well known. Dragon Age is an IP that has history to it, and it absolutely should have Steam behind it, and I just don't see that it does. You can make up whatever argument you want as far as why that reason is. I'll let you guys do that. I am here to assess the numbers. I am here to contextualize the numbers because I don't see a lot of people doing that. The fact is, Dragon Age came out at $60. It came out without EA account linking. It came out with, you know, a lot of those elements going for it. So credit to BioWare, credit to EA for greenlighting that, but that should have improved the numbers, and these numbers are just mid at best, as the kids say. These are mid. Ghost of Tsushima had the equal concurrent player count 4 years after release. By the way, that game came out at the same price point as Veilguard, and it's not matching half the numbers of Dogma 2. It's not getting up to the numbers of Metaphor Refantasio. Like, that's a problem. That is certainly a problem for a game with the history of Dragon Age, as big of an IP as Dragon Age is. It's not a good number, and I don't think anybody, if you're actually assessing the data objectively, can say that this is a good number for a game like Dragon Age. Sure, you beat out one of the worst PC ports of all time. You beat out the Dead Space remake, which is honestly more of an indictment of that game not doing all that well. But you compare it to the games it should be compared to. I think Dragon's Dogma 2 is the fairest comparison point, and that game had 220,000. I would say Dragon Age Veilguard getting half of that would be like a no-brainer. It didn't even muster half of that, so think about that for a second. But that'll do it for me. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comment section down below. As always, thank you for watching, and goodbye. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and if you're already subscribed, do us a favor and hit the bell icon. This way you'll be notified whenever we post a new video. That's the best way to keep up with all of our uploads, and we usually try to upload 2 videos a day. And with the bell icon hit, you'll be notified whenever we do upload a video. As always, thanks for watching.